The year is 2014 and a group of international lawyers are gathered in The Hague. They're about to make the case for why the Vukovar massacre by Serbia in the Croatian War of Independence constituted an act of genocide. The lawyers were led by three British human rights barristers, one of whom wasn't initially a first choice, but when an expert in international criminal law was needed, the group turned to one man, Keir Starmer, a human rights lawyer who had just completed his 5-year term as Director of Public Prosecutions in the UK and was looking for something new. It ended up being a pivotal moment for a man who was about to enter the world of politics. Starmer was then elected as a Member of Parliament the following year. The weeks-long hearings ended in March 2014 with the ICJ ultimately rejecting both Croatian and Serbian claims of genocide. Keir returned home to the UK and began his pursuit of a political career. Nearly a decade on, The Hague is looking into another genocide, this time against Palestinians in Gaza, conducted by the State of Israel. Genocide scholars, human rights lawyers, and Holocaust survivors are all in agreement. This was a genocide. However, one world leader denied this, criminalized protest against it, and continued to support Israel throughout it. That man has now resigned from his post as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. His name is Keir Starmer. Hello and welcome to MEE Live. I'm Lucy Aeneas. It's Tuesday the 23rd of June, 2026. On the 11th of October 2023, Israel's campaign of mass killing was in its first week. Starmer, the frontrunner to be the next Prime Minister, was interviewed by the British broadcaster LBC.
I'm very clear. Israel does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation.
Fast forward to July 2024 and the former human rights barrister wins the general election in a landslide victory. At this point, 8 months into its onslaught in Gaza, Israel is on trial for genocide at the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ. Following their predecessors, the new Labour government threw their weight behind Israel and the United States' policy in the Middle East. November of that year marked over a year of genocide in Gaza, where Israel had killed more than 43,000 Palestinians and wounded over 101,000. At the time, the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. As a signatory to the ICC, Britain is legally obliged to execute its warrants, something protesters had been calling on Starmer to do. Regularly polled, a majority of people in the UK wanted a ceasefire and an end to the UK's unwavering diplomatic support and arms sale to Israel. Hundreds of thousands of Brits took to the streets on a regular basis in support of the Palestinian people. But instead, Starmer's government doubled down. In July 2025, it moved to prescribe direct protest group Palestine Action under the UK's Terrorism Act.
There may be people who are objecting to prescription who don't know the full nature of this organisation. It's really important that no one's in any doubt that this is not a non-violent organisation.
This placed the group that had never killed or attempted to kill anyone in the same category as ISIS and Boko Haram. Week after week, pensioners, veterans, and Holocaust survivors were filmed being dragged into police vans in mass arrests. By the end of 2025, the number of terrorism-related arrests in Britain had soared by 660% compared to the previous year. A typical profile of a British terrorist is now a woman in her late 50s, holding a placard at a peaceful demonstration. Since October 2023, Israel has killed over 70,000 Palestinians in Gaza. This week, Starmer announced his departure from office. Meanwhile, the Palestine Action case continues. The genocide case at the ICJ continues. And one is left wondering, what legacy has he left behind? Here to unpack this is Peter Oborn, Associate Editor of Middle East Eye, author and columnist. Peter, You've written a book called Complicit, Britain's Role in the Destruction of Gaza. What is Starmer's legacy?
Grim, I'm afraid to say. All the more so because there was such hope when he became Prime Minister. Here you had one of the leading experts on human rights law, international human rights law in the world, the first Labour Prime Minister for more than, for 15 years. And this was a chance to really shake things up and bring an end to the chaos and corruption of the Conservative years, instead of which Sir Keir Starmer leaves office. He's been thrown out of office by his own party. And he leaves with a very, as you set out, I think, in your introduction, this terrible legacy of Gaza, where he continued the Tory policy of supplying arms. He gave diplomatic support, the overflights. He didn't even manage ever to say Israel was committing war crimes in Gaza, let alone saying that they committed, genocide. Never acknowledged that Israel is an apartheid state, as all human rights, pretty well every human rights organization in the world is now clear about. So he's been I think it's quite dark, his legacy. And I personally feel that in due course, I think there may be grounds for taking him to The Hague.
Wow. So there is just one part of his resignation speech that I would love to get your reaction. Yesterday he spoke in front of Number 10 for perhaps the last time. We'll just play this clip now.
Because of the choices that I made, our reputation in the world restored, with Britain once again standing up for decency, respect, and the rule of law.
It's simply not true. And I think this kind of remark by Sir Keir Starmer debases public discourse. The fact is that he didn't bring back decency. He continued to supply arms to the Israelis. He didn't try and defend international law. In fact, when the United States went after the International Criminal Court, sanctioned Albanese, sanctioned the ICC, there were no complaints from Britain. And he has this very dark record, and the charge against him is that he is complicit, and he made Britain complicit, maybe worse than complicit, in what most experts now regard as having been a genocide in Gaza. Now, under international law, under the genocide conventions, and under the International Criminal Court, it is a criminal offence under British law to be complicit, to aid and abet a genocide. So if, and it's an if, and it's going to take a long time, the International Court of Justice does deem this to have been a genocide, then there will be a very strong prima facie case to take Sir Keir Starmer alongside his predecessor, Rishi Sunak, the Conservative leader, to The Hague.
Yeah, that is interesting. And so this month, a poll by opinion this month found that over half of former Labour voters who intend to vote for either a centre or a left-wing party saw the genocide, Israel's genocide in Gaza, as a factor that was on their minds in their decision-making process. How significant a role do you think Gaza played in Starmer's collapse of his political supports?
Yes, it's quite a difficult question to answer that, because you're asking a question about the domestic impact of Britain's foreign policy as it regards Israel, Gaza, Palestine. But it has to. I think you can say this with absolute clarity that when Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, he had a a right-wing agenda. He wanted to do what the United States wanted. He wanted to remain aligned with Netanyahu's Israel, and he was eager not to confront the right-wing press in Britain. And he was against, and he was very happy to throw left-wing MPs out of the Labour Party, including, of course, Jeremy Corbyn. Now, that did happen, and that created the conditions for the rise of the Green Party. I mean, everybody talks about Zach Polanski and the Greens, but what they don't do is give the credit to Keir Starmer, who created the Greens as a mass party. That's one of his legacies, and that, although it's welcome, it's broken Labour, and it leaves Keir Starmer. Sorry, I do apologise. It leaves Andy Burnham with this dilemma: do I go back and try and retrieve these voters who've been so disgusted by British government policy over Gaza, or do I leave them alone? Now, that Labour can't win an election because it's, as matters stand, because it's just basically deliberately said goodbye to maybe 10% of the British electorate who were Labour and aren't anymore.
And I have a question on Burnham later, but I just want to ask you before. In September 2025, the UK announced it would recognise the state of Palestine. Do you think that this is a redeeming moment for Keir Starmer in the history books?
Well, it's better that he recognised the state of Palestine than that he didn't recognise it. And I went to the very moving ceremony when we're outside what the mission suddenly became the embassy and the flag going up. It was a lovely moment, but it was far too late and it was far too little. I mean, there are so many other things he should have done at that point. By the way, by that stage, it was a disgrace that we were arming Israel. It's a disgrace that we haven't sanctioned the settlements because, we know what's happening. What the settlers are doing, eradicating Palestinian villages, erasing them, ethnically cleansing, and so on.
And so my last question is about Andy Burnham. And, there's been a lot of ambiguity around his stance on Israel. He was, in 2015, he joined the Labour Friends of Israel. He said that the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement against Israel was spiteful. But at the same time, he was ahead of most of Starmer's cabinets in demanding for a ceasefire. And he's been vocal in his support of the two-state solution. Are you hopeful that he will have a different foreign policy in the Middle East to Keir Starmer?
Yes, I would have said that he is going to change his policies. I think it's politically necessary for Andy Burnham to differentiate himself from a figure who I think is going to turn into a pariah in Labour politics quite quickly, Sir Keir Starmer. And Andy Burnham was also in Labour Friends of Palestine. Now, that's been an ambiguous group, but he was taken by Kabu, the Anglo-British, he was taken by Kabu, which is the British Arab body, which is generally fairly pro-Palestine, to the West Bank. Chris Doyle, who's the director of Kabu, says that Andy Burnham listened, he understood, he was quite shocked by what he saw. And so I think to project him, as some commentators have done, as some sort of creature of Israel or the Labour Friends of Israel just isn't right. And I think that Mr. Burnham will understand that if he's going to rebuild Labour as a united party rather than a right-wing faction, which is the legacy of Sir Keir Starmer, then I think that Burnham will change quite dramatically.
Peter Oborne, thank you so much. And today, that is all we have time for. To all of you watching, thanks for tuning in. Like, subscribe, make sure you're following us on social media at Middle East Eye. You can email meelive@middleeasteye.net. We'll be here live at 5 every Tuesday and Thursday, noon if you're in New York. See you then.